This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hello and welcome to the Extra Point Podcast here with Southridge Church. My name's Anna. I'm the youth pastor here. And with us today is Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And he brought us a new sermon from the sermon series, You've Got the Wrong Guy. This sermon series is all about who Jesus really is, maybe allowing ourselves to get a corrective lens view on who Jesus is based on Scripture and based on historic accuracy of the person of Jesus. And so as we dove into week 2, right? Week 2 of this series, we got to see who Jesus really is. Do we have the wrong guy? And how can we see the real Jesus? So from this series, or this particular sermon, we talked about how Jesus is not just our safety net. He's not just our like superhero or teddy bear there to make things in life cozy and safe. Can you give us a little bit of maybe even a overview of what that looked like?
Yeah, so this week we were talking about if Jesus is like a teddy bear to you, you've got the wrong guy. Meaning, you know, when you were little, when you had your teddy bear with you, you kind of felt like invincible, like nothing bad was going to happen. Like if you were nervous about going to daycare, all you had to do was take your teddy bear with you, and all of a sudden you weren't nervous anymore because nothing bad can happen as long as Teddy's around. And that's the view that some people have of Jesus. It's like, well, like if Jesus is around, nothing bad should happen to me whatsoever.
Yeah.
And there's this view, and the problem with this view is, first off, it doesn't play out really good in our lives since all of us have to deal with really difficult things all the time, and so you're gonna end up with a really weird understanding. Like if your understanding is Jesus doesn't let bad stuff happen to people that are faithful to Him, but yet bad stuff keeps happening to you, then you're going to come to the idea that you're unfaithful. Therefore, all this stuff that's happening to you is some sort of punishment, which that's not the case. Or you're going to, and this is what happens a lot of times, you're going to get frustrated with the fact that all this stuff is happening to you despite being faithful to God, and just decide, well, maybe God's not actually real.
Right.
Which this is the number one reason why people become atheists, is that they don't know how to reconcile evil and suffering in the world,
Right.
which is I do understand that position. It's one I have sympathy for, to be honest, because I think every answer that we come up with is just an answer philosophically, but it doesn't do us a whole lot of good in the moment as far as why this is happening and all that sort of thing. Like philosophical answers don't really bring comfort. They bring, understanding after the fact, but they don't bring comfort in the midst of a situation. So that's why so many people end up with that. However, I would just caution people that if that's the journey that you're on, where maybe you're deconstructing a little bit because somebody in your life went through something difficult, don't forget that if you wind up identifying as an atheist or an agnostic or a Buddhist or anything else, you still have the problem of evil no matter what your world. None of that gets rid of the problem of evil. We've just now transferred it into different, mindsets, but it doesn't get rid of the problem.
Yeah.
So, like, even though maybe you have an issue with God existing in a world that has evil, that same evil is going to exist even if you try to act like God doesn't exist. So it doesn't actually deal with the problem. It just kicks the can further down. And I would say it actually kicks the can into an area where you're going to find less help.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about yesterday with the 4 points yesterday. Even though Jesus isn't like a teddy bear and keeps all this stuff away from you, he is present with you in the midst of it.
Right.
So we said you're not alone.
Right.
He brings hope in the midst of it because we have something to look forward to because of what He's done for us on the cross. He understands because the whole story is that He went through pain and suffering and all of that. And so it's also really interesting that people will discredit Christianity on the grounds of evil and suffering and all that, when the whole thing is kind of based on a guy
Yeah.
that suffered and dealt with evil. And then the fourth thing that we mentioned was that it won't always be like this. Those 4 points you won't find in those other worldviews. That's the
Yeah.
problem. If you decide, well, God doesn't exist because evil exists, and now we have to deal with evil and suffering and all that, well, you end up as an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
We still have evil, but now you don't have any comfort. Now it just seems like the world is just super random, and there's nothing that can be done about it. There's no hope. There's no, like, now, boom, you're in the middle of this situation for nothing. Like, you get nothing out of it. Your life is just like.
Mm-hmm.
So you've now just entered into a new realm where you still have to deal with evil, but now you have no help, no hope whatsoever. And so it's not really a wise choice to take.
Yeah. I know that I have heard that from folks. That has been the idea that, I can't align with a God who allows for evil and allows for suffering.
Yeah.
And that's been something in the past. I've not always known how to have that discussion. And what's really helpful, and this is kind of from those 4 points, like the hope that's offered through Christ, his understanding, understanding that these things can actually make us better. Like,
Yeah.
that's so crazy to think that, but to say, like, these hardships we go through can actually make us better for ourselves, better for others, better
Yeah.
for God and his kingdom purposes. But I think that even beyond those things that were discussed in the sermon, there is evidence that supports this allowance of suffering, and even the singular existence of evil,
Yeah.
to a real, true, and living God.
Yeah.
And we see him redeeming his creation, but in the process, evil is real.
Yeah.
What does that look like? The tangible evidence of evil in the world, and how, if I'm having trouble having these conversations with a friend or a family member, saying, well, there's still hope in Jesus. Well, what if they're past that? They're just not even, or on the other end, they're not to that point yet.
Yeah.
Are there other evidences of evil in the world that still can point to a good and loving creator?
100%. So, like, the fact that evil exists, this is actually like something from apologist Frank Turek. He says that when we complain about evil, we're presupposing that the existence of God. So it's interesting that people try to use evil to discredit the idea of a God, when really, when you complain about evil and suffering and all of this stuff, you're actually presupposing that God exists. Like, how is that the case, though? You like, people may
Right.
wonder, like, how does that prove that God exists? Well, it proves that God exists because without some sort of moral standard that is outside of the human experience, then nothing is anything, right? Like, without some sort of moral standard that is not subjective, right? Because if we get into, well, this relativistic idea that the world seems to be so keen on these days, even though it lacks intellectual, validity whatsoever,
Yeah.
like, we're never going to end up with a true understanding of what right and wrong, good and evil, suffering, not suffering is, if it's all based on you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if it's just, like, for Anna, this may be evil, and
Right.
then for, somebody else, they don't see it as evil. So therefore, if we don't end up with some sort of standard apart from the subjectivity of humanity,
Right.
and so the very idea that you have a problem with evil means that you have to point to something beyond humanity to prove that that thing is actually evil.
Mm-hmm.
The most consistent atheist will tell you there's no such thing as evil.
Mm-hmm.
I will respect an atheist that believes that. I will respect an atheist that goes, no, I'm not saying that there's value propositions in the world at all. Anything goes, because that's the world. If atheism is true, that's the world that we live in, is that anything goes. The idea that we have laws or anything like that is all nonsense if atheism is true, because there's no value propositions when everything is subjective, right? Go ask, one person, hey, is murder wrong? And somebody might immediately go, yes, and then someone else might go, well, let's hear the situation.
Right.
Right? When everything is subjective. So if you want to complain about evil, which is what a lot of atheists do,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to go, they're presupposing that God exists. If you're a very consistent atheist and you just go, no, evil doesn't exist, everything is just whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You catch cancer, no big deal, right? That's got to be the worldview of the atheist if they're going to stay consistent. Now, what some have done is rather than going that route, because I think, they're smart enough to know that sounds crazy.
Yeah, right.
Nobody wants to live in a world where Anna can just do whatever the heck she wants.
Well, I think the average person, the average person who is far from God or doesn't believe in God, whatever that looks like, they still have some layer of compassion or empathy or like moral standard, and to say like, oh, it's everything just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's a hard life to live.
I don't think anyone wants to live in that sort of world.
Right.
A world where we just go, no, you can do whatever you want, and I will never complain, no matter what it is. Even if you do it to me.
Yeah, it's unrealistic, and
it's not tenable.
I would say if someone's in that reality, they are living in their own reality. They're not living in the world
and
with
honestly,
everybody else.
you'll find inconsistencies in it, because they'll say, no, that's I don't have value propositions or whatever it is. You go, okay, so if if a guy walked up to you on the street right now, stuck a knife in your chest, you're just going to go, well, that's just what he wanted to do. No problem. They're going to go, no, I've got a problem. What do you have a problem with? None of this has without that. So what some people have tried to do is they try to change what is meant by good and evil, so that way we can get outside of the need for God in the argument.
Yeah.
Which doesn't work. Like the Freedom from Religion founder and president, Dan Barker, he says good is that which enhances life, and evil is that which threatens it. Well, here's the problem with that. Who said that?
Right.
Who said that good is what enhances life? Because
and what is enhance? Like, what are these values?
Yes, because I go, okay, on what basis are we coming to that? Let's say you say, okay, good is what enhances a life, so... You know how many things I could justify by that definition as being good?
Right.
Right? Like, what if my wife drives me insane, and it will enhance my life for her no longer to be on this planet?
Right.
Is that really good, Dan? Is that really... It enhances life for me. Is that really good? Of course it's not good. That's a horrible thing to say.
Right.
What if a bunch of starving people overseas means that you have everything that you want? It enhances your life. Are you saying that's a good thing? Like,
right.
It's crazy way to look at the world, to just say, no, good is anything that enhances life. Well, what do you mean by that? We're just making random statements now to try to dress it up and exclude God, but you can't do that.
Right.
It's the same thing Sam Harris says, morality is the right and wrong answers to the question of how to maximize human flourishing in any moment. I don't get that exactly, because first off, who says human flourishing is good? As humans, because the same group of people kind of have an issue with the way that humans have flourished.
Yeah, right.
Right? Oh, we have all this technology now. Now we don't like the impact it's having on the environment, but humans are flourishing.
Yeah.
But you would tell me that driving a diesel truck is evil, because well, wait a second. What do we mean by... So you see how they're just calling stuff other things, and he goes, it's still subjective. When I go human flourishing, that's still very subjective. That's not a ideal standard, because what is flourishing for Anna may not be flourishing for me.
Right.
What is good for Dan Barker and what he considers evil is drastically different than how I would.
Right.
And so therefore we're still dealing with subjectivity, so we're still not dealing with absolute morals or ethics or anything like that. So therefore we have not solved the problem of evil just by trying to remove God from it whatsoever. Right? And this is literally decades and centuries long debate going all the way back to Epicurus. Like, Epicurus was a 4th century philosopher who kind of came up with like what he thought was the end all argument for, well, this is going to be the nail in the coffin for God. Yeah. If God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he's not omnipotent. He's not all powerful. If he wants to prevent evil but he can't stop it, he goes, well, he's not all powerful. If he is able but he's unwilling, then it looks like he's malevolent, right? If he's able to stop evil but he doesn't, then he looks to be terrible. if he's both able and willing, then where does evil come from? And then if he's neither one, then why would we call him God in the first place? And so he thinks that's the nail in the coffin for God. Go, look, if he allows evil, he's bad. If he can't stop evil, then he's not powerful. And if either of those things are true, he's not God. So he's like, well, that's the end of the discussion. But it's really not. Like, again, even if I could go to Sam Harris's definition of morality and go, well, what if God had a morally superior way to help humans flourish if it meant that certain things had to happen?
Yeah. Things that maybe people don't want to do
Yeah.
or wouldn't like or
Yeah.
isn't their preference.
Yeah, because here's the deal. In every situation, pain brings progress.
Yeah.
Pain always brings progress. I was at the gym this morning. I'm in pain right now, but it's because I'm trying to get somewhere.
Yeah.
Pain always brings progress. And so, according to Sam and Dan, things that bring pain, that bring progress could be a good thing, but what if the things that bring pain are actually objectively wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, like when we're in subjective world, that's a very scary world that really people that espouse that, they want that for everyone else, but they would never want that for themselves.
Right.
There's no way you would want just people just walking around just doing whatever they want all the time.
Yeah.
That's not a way that any of us could possibly begin to live. So it doesn't get rid of the need for God to sit here and change the goalpost whatsoever. We still need an objective morality beyond all of that. And that's why there's no, like with the Epicurean dilemma, there's no issue with God allowing evil if he has a morally superior reason why he might do so.
Yeah.
Why did God let Jesus get crucified? Because he had a morally superior reason for doing so, so it would bring in the new creation to where this will eventually not be a thing in the future.
Right.
So he had a morally superior reason. Why does God allow evil? Sometimes, we talked about this on Sunday, if people only ever had easy street in life, they would be the most difficult people on the face of the earth to deal with. People that don't have to deal with bad stuff in life are the worst people.
Yeah.
They have no character. They haven't been tested. They haven't had any perseverance. At the slightest sign of pain, they crumble.
Yeah.
So if God allows people to experience pain and suffering because it brings about perseverance and character in their life, then he has a morally superior reason for doing so.
Yeah.
So therefore, he's not malevolent for allowing it to happen. And since he's not causing it to happen, he's also not malevolent. And he's not, if he wanted to stop it, he absolutely could. But he doesn't, which also that means that he is all-powerful.
Yeah.
So the Epicurean dilemma, even on paper, looks kind of good, but it really doesn't hold up to the scrutiny whatsoever. And so the other thing that will then happen is then people will just go, you know what, maybe God does exist because we need this moral standard, but all of this is his fault, so therefore he's not worthy of worship because, I mean, he's to blame for all of this. This is what they, and they go, well, that's not really the biblical account whatsoever of how we came to evil and suffering. Right, evil and suffering was not part of God's good and perfect creation whatsoever. It was the actions of humanity, right? So if, like I was having a conversation with someone yesterday after church, and they were like, well, you never kind of got to the reason why there is evil and suffering. I was, well, that wasn't really the point of yesterday's sermon, but the answer is simple. It was the fall of humanity is responsible for all of this.
Yeah.
God is not responsible for this, and God is not arbitrary in the sense that he's like just bringing suffering on whoever he is. Like, no, what he's doing is allowing things that to naturally occur within the created order that he has given free will for humanity, and the good and beautiful creation was disrupted. So therefore, all sickness of any sort comes from the fall.
Right.
All natural disasters comes from the fall. These don't come from God.
Right.
This is why, it's really atrocious when people say stuff like God has afflicted someone with a trial and stuff, and it's like, and they're pulling only Old Testament. And it's like, no. We are mixing things up right now. God is not smiting people for their unfaithfulness to him, right? God doesn't like, oh, well, that town's very bad, so I'm
Yeah.
going to send a tornado. This is not the way that God operates whatsoever in this current time that we live in. Because of the cross of Christ, God does not operate off of a blessing and cursing type of mentality the way that he had set up with Israel in the Old Testament. That was a different system. That's why we're under the new covenant.
Right.
So that's not what's happening. So it would be wrong of us to assume God is responsible for evil either. God knew it was a possibility given the fact that he wanted to make free creatures.
Right.
That was a risk he was willing to take, clearly.
Yeah.
Because if he didn't give humanity freedom, then they could never choose to freely love him. And that's ultimately what he wanted. Plus, he made us in his image, and if he is free, then we have to be free as well. And so we can't come to assume that God is to blame either. And so one of the other problems that people will sometimes come up with is, well, why would this God allow bad things to happen to good people? And I've always contended that is just the absolute wrong question.
Right.
It's 100% the wrong question. Because it's, who says that we're good?
Yeah.
Only us. We're the only people that say that we're good, decent people. Because if we look at the Bible, like Psalm 53, and it's repeated again in Romans, the scriptures say no one is good, no one does good, everyone does evil, everyone runs like excitedly towards evil.
Yeah.
That's what we do. And so the question, why does God allow good things to happen to bad people, is a ridiculous question. So according to the scriptures, everyone's bad.
Yeah.
Everyone falls short. I know nobody feels that way about themselves, but that's because we're judging ourselves based on someone else.
Yeah.
Right? That's because I feel morally superior to the person down the road because they're, a drug addict or a prostitute, and, well, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm judging myself off of that and then go, well, no wonder I feel like I'm a good person. But if you were to put me up next to the standard of a holy God who does no wrong, well, then I failed. Every one of us fails that test miserably.
Yeah.
And we all of a sudden realize, oh, we're not as good as what we think we are if we will judge it off the right person. And so the better question has always been, why would God let anything good happen to any of these bad people?
Yeah.
Why? Like me, all the problems I've caused in my life, why in the world would God bless me the way that he has right now? Why would God die for me? Why would he save me? Why would he bless me? Like, it's just crazy to think of that. So we're asking the wrong question. Not why does God let bad stuff happen to good people? Well, why does God let anything good happen to any of us that are so messed up? That's the better question. And so Sunday, we talked about, we're going to have to deal with it. And so at least we have, the hope of his presence and what he's done for us, and he understands, and those things that I went over. But just to get to the root of it, like, this is the world that we have, and finding a different worldview is not going to get you away from evil and suffering.
Yeah.
And so I think the Christian worldview offers the best help in the midst of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that as we consider, like, the view of Jesus that we each have, especially after this past week and going into the future, recognizing that God 100% understands what we go through, including suffering and evil. Like, just 100% is there. And being able to see Jesus and his, even his reflection of God, like the way that Jesus lived as God, was just, he still impacted and influenced suffering and pain as he lived here with people. Like, and so to know that, like, God is making a way through suffering, through pain, to him, to who he really is, and to be with his original most prized possession, people. And so if you're joining us for this podcast, share this with a friend who might need to be reminded that God wants to be near to people. And that's a way we can view him. And there are ways that he's done that through Jesus, through you, through others, through his spirit working in our lives. And so today, thank you so much for joining us. Join us next Sunday for another week of You've Got the Wrong Guy, as we take a look at who Jesus really is and if our view of him matches up to who he says he is and who we see him to be. Thank you for joining us on The Extra Point. Make sure you subscribe and share. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.